the top of the individual sheets, all 12 lunettes of the months were designed by the Limbourg Brothers. In contrast to the illustrations of the months, some of which were composed or completed by other authors, many decades after the tragic death of the artists. The evidence of the image, imprinted on the sheet of the illuminated decoration, makes us realize that ch month is completed by its calendar, indicating the saint celebrated daily. The lunette above has the task of depicting the zodiac signs of the month, in a harmonious correspondence between the celestial and terrestrial dimensions. In fact, to enjoy maximum benefits, the latter must be in perfect harmony with the former. This was one of the heyday of astrology, a discipline cultivated by all the scholars of the time, and whose skills were in demand by all kings, popes, nobles and ecclesiastics. In the lunette, the sun chariot, the tutelary star of the entire calendar, transits the October sky, accompanied by the signs of the month, the outgoing sign of Libra and the incoming sign of Scorpio. As always, the different portions occupied and the different coloring allude to their permanence in the reference month. For the depiction of the sun chariot, the illuminators drew inspiration from a medal owned by the Duke of Berry, depicting Heraclius, Emperor of the East. Above, in concentric semicircles, the phases of the moon and the length of days are indicated. The scene below is divided in two by the Seine, flowing between two estates. That of the Palace of Nesle, where the Duke of Berry lived, and where his peasants work in the foreground. And that of the Château du Louvre, the royal residence of the Duke's brother, King Charles V, a tangible symbol of the prestige and power of the kings of France, and the lineage of the Duke of Berry. A vast building complex, with luxurious flats for the lords, staterooms, courtyards, towers, roofs of grey slate, weather vanes in the wind, with the ever-present fleur-de-lis and sturdy walls. The Louvre was the symbol of the king's prestige. It was the clearest symbol of the power and solidity of the royal family, which was in crisis in those very years due to an incessant war. So long that it went down in history as the 100 Years' War. But near the fortified walls, war is not scary. The nobles of the court can stroll peacefully and converse along the Seine, while moored boats testify to the incessant traffic of people and goods along the river. With this illuminated page, one almost seems to see the scene with the Duke of Berry, inside his possessions, in subjective view. In the foreground, the dominant color of the landscape is the brown of plowed earth. The sober hue took the place of the yellow of summer's ripe wheat or the warm hues of September's vineyards and freshly harvested grapes. It is now late autumn and the fields are being sown for the new year. In perfect correspondence with the sign of Scorpio, which seems to be oriented towards the activities of farmers, the seasonal symbolism is precisely that of sowing and resting the fields. This expresses the death-life antithesis. The seed must face death before it bears fruit and germinates. A farmer on horseback uses a harrow weighed down with a stone to break up clods and facilitate sowing. During the Middle Ages, the horse began to flank the ox in field work. Although it does not always have the same shooting capacity as an ox, it proves to be more maneuverable, faster and stronger. The rigid, padded collar that rests on the animal's shoulders is clearly visible. An innovation that does not hinder the animal's breathing, guaranteeing superior towing performance. A peasant, wearing a blue tunic, scatters the seeds contained in the white sack he carries over his shoulder. The sown grain is a symbol of wealth, invested to produce new wealth. The purses worn by the two workers, as well as the sack full of seeds placed on the ground, are also symbols of abundance. In the figure scattering the seeds, there is an obvious reference to the parable of the sower and the seeds that fell by the wayside and were eaten by the birds. There are magpies and crows on the ground pecking at the freshly sown seed, a metaphor for the king's enemies, who would like to seize the riches of France. Regarding the number of magpies and crows and their symbolic value, a nursery rhyme was known at the time. In a variant of the nursery rhyme concerning crows, it was precisely the number 11 that identified the last verse, concerning the secret that must not be told. The alchemical meaning, of which the working of the earth becomes a metaphor, thus defines the best auspices for the achievement of the magnum opus. The 5 magpies are an omen of wealth and victory, with silver being sown and turning into gold during the following year's harvest. The 11 ravens, the secret that must never be told, allude instead to the completion of the alchemical magnum opus, the greatest aspiration of every alchemist. The raven, like Scorpio, the protective sign of the month, has among its various symbols that of the moment of transition from one phase to another. In this case, it alludes to the transition from the autumn and winter sleep of nature to what will be the spring and summer awakening. With Scorpio are also associated secrecy, mystery, and the occult. What sign could be more propitious for undertaking alchemical phases? The scarecrow protecting the sown grains is a symbol of good omen for the following year's harvest, and of protection and defense of one's possessions from the attack of enemies who would like to steal them. Its representation is that of an archer. It thus also indicates the defense of the territory, at a time of year when military undertakings, due to the inherent difficulties of the season, are often suspended, only to resume in spring. Continuing to look at the scene from the point of view of the underlying alchemical code, one is reminded that the figure of the alchemist is often symbolized by a farmer working the land to transform it and make it bear fruit. The colors of the clothes worn by the peasants are not realistic, as colored fabrics were extremely expensive and could only be used by the wealthy classes. The poorer people used white, black, gray, or brown clothing. Thus, their presence, in addition to their aesthetic value, has a symbolic function. Black, white, and red are symbols of nigredo, albedo, and rubedo, the three stages of the magnum opus, in alchemy, to realize the philosopher's stone. Thus, black in alchemy is a symbol of the nigredo, the first phase of the magnum opus, i.e. the operation of transforming matter to purify it, and obtain the philosopher's stone, and the elixir of life. The concept of nigredo is further emphasized by the presence of crows, the traditional symbol of this alchemical phase. White is symbolic of albedo, the second phase of the magnum opus. And finally, red represents rubedo, which is the final completion of the transmutations, culminating in the realization of the philosopher's stone, and the conversion of base metals into gold. The concept of the three phases is underlined by the presence of the three visible towers, the three boats, and the three steps. On the other side there are 5 steps, to allude to the 4 natural elements, earth, water, fire and air, and the 5th, ether, also known as quintessence. However, we also have a peasant wearing a blue robe, that refers both to the alchemical blue, and together with red and white, also to the 3 essential elements, linked by dynamics of opposition and synthesis between them. I.e. for blue, Mercury, the volatile feminine element. For red, iron, the fixed masculine element, and for white, salt, which acted as a binder. The series of ropes in the freshly sown field allude to the alchemical labyrinth, i.e. the long series of rules and procedures required to achieve the philosopher's stone. The stone holding the tilling tool on the ground symbolizes the fixed elements, the magpie next to it, the volatile ones. The scarecrow carries an outstretched bow, with which it appears to hit the target. It is the symbol of research, which must be directed towards a precise goal. The illuminators were able to include extremely realistic details. The peasants' garments, the furrows and footprints in the fields, the shadows of the characters in the foreground, without sacrificing the poetry of the composition as a whole. As one of the greatest scholars of the Limbourg Brothers, Millard Mice, comments, "No painter could match the smooth perfection of their surface, their limpid color and complex simplicity. Their art could capture the delicate transitory beauty of a newly opened flower."